Some kids laugh their way through childhood, chasing playground dreams without a second thought. But if you'd walked into that house that spring, you'd have seen an 8-year-old boy named Benjamin sitting perfectly still by the window, knees to chest, head shaved smooth by cancer and sorrow. Too afraid of what might come tumbling out if they did. You know what I mean? And then one morning, the new housekeeper, Nina Moore, walked in, but Nina wasn't there to tidy up. She was about to break through all the walls everyone else had built, with a single, wordless gesture that changed everything. She didn't knock. Pressed against the window, eyes fixed so far away it felt like he was searching for someone on the other side of the glass. Nina walked straight to the middle of the room, sat down cross-legged right on the carpet, plugged in a set of clippers, and, in total silence, pulled her thick curls up with one hand, pressed the buzzing blade to her scalp, and let it all fall, patch by patch, her deep brown hair scattering over the floor, not as mess, but as some kind of offering. She didn't look at him, didn't make a speech, just shaved her head until there was nothing left between them but bare skin and breath, the room filling up with the sound of that little machine and the unspoken dare in the air. "I'll go first. Will you follow?" That's when Benjamin blinked. First movement in weeks, and Nina felt the tiniest flutter of hope, but said nothing, just finished, rubbed her head, and looked at him, no mask. So soft it was almost lost, he whispered, "You look like Mom." A crack of thunder, a breaking of clouds, that voice no one thought they'd ever hear again. At the door, Benjamin's father, Richard, stood frozen, the man who'd built empires, now floored by the sight of his son speaking, and a stranger kneeling beside him with no hair left on her head. A new gravity drawing three people together when all the old rules had failed. The next morning, the house felt different. Not because anyone announced it. Both of them learning to breathe in a world that had tried to suffocate them. Over days, their language grew, drawings taped to doors, a second mug of tea quietly pushed across the tray. A single nod exchanged at breakfast instead of words. Richard watched it all from a distance, feeling like a visitor in his own home, seeing his son hum and laugh, and even scribble on the walls. Things he thought were gone forever. He tried to argue with Nina about structure and boundaries, tried to remind her of her role. "Your staff, not family." But she only replied, gentle but steady. "He needs to feel again, Richard. That's not fantasy, that's survival." They fought quietly. The way people do when what they're really fighting is their own fear, is fear that someone else had managed to reach his boy when he could not. That night, Richard found Benjamin asleep on the couch, curled up with his head in Nina's lap, her hand over his, and it nearly undid him. Not with jealousy, but with the realization that maybe, just maybe, family wasn't a thing you could draw up in contracts or build from blood alone. The real kind was forged in small moments, letting a child draw on the walls, holding his hand in the hospital, sitting together in a garden planting seeds with made-up names, hope, grace, forever. Over time, the three of them worked side by side in that neglected plot of earth. Nina and Benjamin with dirty hands, Richard lingering on the edge until one day he brought gloves, joined without words, and planted something wild and messy in the dirt. And as the garden grew, so did the courage in that house. Benjamin started to speak, first in whispers, then in full-throated laughs, each one a victory bigger than any fundraising gala or business deal. He even dared the music room, sitting at the piano with Nina, making broken, beautiful noise, the air between them alive with mistakes and hope. Richard watched, learning slowly that permission to heal sometimes comes from the least expected place, from someone who stays, who doesn't run when it gets messy. But nothing lasts forever. One night, a sudden fever sent Benjamin back to the hospital, Richard arriving frantic, Nina refusing to leave his side. When a nurse said, "Only family after 9, Benjamin clung to Nina, crying. Not as help, but as family. She said yes, quietly, hand over his heart, and for the first time since Emily died, the future felt possible again. Spring turned to summer. And one afternoon on a windy hill, Benjamin ran with a red kite, laughing, strong, Nina and Richard watching from a blanket, shoes off, eyes bright. The kite soared higher than any of them dreamed. Benjamin shouting, "It's not falling," and Nina replying, "Neither are you." They didn't need to name it. Family was already living in the spaces between them. No one took out a camera. The moment didn't need proof. It was real. Here's the thing, though. This story isn't about a miracle cure or a perfect ending. Grief still lingered, and some days the world felt heavy. But they stayed, together, making music out of wrong notes, growing flowers from broken earth. And if you're listening, maybe you felt it too. The ache of wanting to belong. The terror of letting someone in. So tell me, do you think family is what you're born into, or what you build when all the easy answers are gone? If this story touched something in you, share your thoughts below. I'd love to know what family means to you. And if you believe, like I do, that sometimes the people who save us are the ones who simply refuse to leave, let me back up a sec. Because if you think the kite in the sky was the end of this story, you'd be missing what really happened after. The thing about healing is it never goes in a straight line, right? Some days you think you're through the storm, only to find the sky darkening again. And that's exactly what hit the Hale house in the weeks after that bright afternoon. The air was lighter. Sure, Benjamin slept easier, Richard smiled more. Nina moved through the rooms with a quiet certainty that she belonged. But if you'd looked closely, you'd have seen the shadows still drifting through the corners, lingering in the places only family ever notices. The first sign was small, almost easy to miss. Benjamin stopped wanting to play piano. The music room felt quiet. He didn't talk about it, but Nina noticed the way he'd glance at the closed door, fingers fidgeting. Something uneasy beneath the surface. She didn't push, just waited, let him drift. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do for someone you love is let them go silent again, trusting they'll find their voice when they're ready. Richard struggled with this. He'd grown used to the little victories, the laughter, the lists on the fridge, the messy joy that had crept back into their lives. And suddenly, he was helpless again, watching his son retreat behind invisible walls. One night, he stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea, and admitted to Nina, "I'm scared we're losing him again." Nina just looked at him, eyes steady, and said, "We're not losing him. He's just figuring out how to carry it all." Sometimes kids have to put the pain down, pick it up, put it down again, until it stops being so heavy. It was a rainy Thursday, the kind that soaks into your bones, when everything shifted. Benjamin stayed home from school, a little pale, not sick, just tired in that way only grief makes you tired. Nina came to check on him, and found him curled on the window bench, staring at the garden where the wildflowers had started to wilt. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't say a word. She sat beside him, silent for a long while, just watching the drops chase each other down the glass. Then, so softly it almost wasn't there, Benjamin whispered, "Do you think she sees us?" Nina didn't pretend to know. That's the mistake most adults make, thinking answers will fix a pain this old. She just reached out, linked her pinky with his, and said, "I think she sees how much we miss her, and that's enough." Benjamin nodded, but his mouth twisted, fighting tears. "I don't remember her voice anymore." Nina breathed deep, steadying herself, and said, "Then we'll remember her in other ways. You show me your drawings, I'll play her favorite songs. Maybe between the two, we'll find her again." That promise, small as it was, mattered. The next day, a new drawing appeared on Nina's pillow. 3 figures, holding hands under a rain cloud, all with halos like crooked crowns above their heads. Richard saw the drawing, too, and something inside him crumbled. For the first time, he took down the photo of Emily from the hallway, not to hide her, but to bring her to the kitchen, to the dinner table, to the places where life was actually happening. They began to tell stories about her, not just the good ones, but the funny, awkward, even the sad. That's how you keep someone alive, you know? That's when the twist arrived, and if you've ever lived through loss, you'll recognize it. Out of nowhere, Emily's younger sister, Chloe, arrived at the door, suitcase in hand. Hair the same bright red as Emily's, eyes tired but fierce. No one had invited her, no one expected her. She just showed up, declaring, "I want to help." The energy in the house shifted, fast. Chloe was loud where Nina was gentle, impulsive where Richard was cautious, full of stories about the past that made Benjamin grin and Richard wince in equal measure. At first, Nina worried. Would Chloe disrupt the fragile peace they'd found? But as days passed, Chloe became the wild card they didn't know they needed. She baked terrible cookies, sang off-key lullabies, painted a giant mural of Emily's favorite beach on the music room wall, and dared Benjamin to add his own waves. He did, quietly at first, then with color, then with laughter, splattering blue across the white and onto Chloe's shirt, the floor, even the piano keys. The music room woke up. For the first time, Richard saw his house not just as a place for survival, but a place for living. Nina and Chloe were so different, sometimes at odds, but always orbiting Benjamin, giving him two different kinds of safety, the calm anchor and the wild wind. Nina, steady as sunrise. Chloe, unpredictable, a bolt of lightning through old grief. Together, they made space for Benjamin to grieve and to grow. One evening, as the four of them sat in the garden, dirt under their nails, Chloe asked Benjamin if he ever talked to his mom out loud. He shook his head, embarrassed, but she shrugged and said, "I do. I tell her everything, even when I'm mad at her for leaving." Benjamin laughed at that, and then, slowly, began to talk to the air, a one-sided conversation, soft and halting, but real. Nina squeezed his hand. Chloe ruffled his hair. Richard watched with a kind of awe. Here's the thing about found family, yeah? It doesn't erase the old scars. Doesn't replace the people you lose. It just builds something sturdy to carry the ache. The house filled up with noise again, some of it good, some of it messy, but all of it alive. Benjamin began to draw more, to write lists of things he wanted to do. Go camping, learn to swim, visit Emily's hometown with Chloe and Nina, all scrawled in shaky handwriting on the fridge. Richard, for his part, found himself less and less in his study, more often on the couch, reading out loud, learning how to parent not from a book, but from the rhythm of Benjamin's laughter. Then came the day of the gala, the one that had haunted Richard for months. This time, he didn't go alone. Chloe and Nina dressed Benjamin in his now-beloved suit, added a splash of color to his tie, gave him a confidence he'd never had before. At the event, they were a strange little group, one bald woman, one wild redhead, a businessman trying to learn how to smile, and a boy who had once been silent but now clung to Nina's hand like a lifeline. They laughed through awkward speeches, posed for a photo that wasn't quite right but felt perfect, and when the music played, Nina and Chloe dragged Richard and Benjamin to the dance floor, where, for a few dizzy minutes, the past and the future spun together in the lights. As the night wound down, Benjamin tugged Nina's arm and whispered, "I think Mom would have liked this." Nina hugged him close and replied, "She'd have loved it, especially the dancing." Chloe chimed in, "And she'd be mad I wore these shoes," making everyone laugh until they nearly cried. Even Richard, stiff as ever, grinned. When they returned home, the moon was high, the house was warm, and as Benjamin slipped into sleep, he mumbled, "I'm glad you're all here." Chloe tucked him in, Nina closed the door, and Richard stood in the hallway, finally understanding what it meant to be home. If you've ever wondered whether broken families can heal, whether strangers can become anchors, whether laughter can return after silence, look at this story. It's not about fixing what's lost, but building new rooms for joy, for pain, for memory, and for hope. And maybe that's what family is. The people who show up and stay and dance with you in the dark. So let me ask you, in your life, have you ever let someone unexpected in? Has your idea of family changed? Share your stories below. I promise, someone out there needs to know that healing can come from the most unlikely hands.